Continuing with the theme of supporting fathers alluded to through the podcast we just heard and in many of our breakout sessions from earlier today, we will now transition into our next panel entitled, Who's in Your Band? Helping Dad Be Dad. Joining us to moderate this panel is the Reverend Dr. Jerry Askew, who is the Archdeacon of the Episcopal Diocese of East Tennessee and serves on the clergy staff at St. John's Cathedral in Knoxville. Over the course of his career, Reverend Dr. Askew has served as a university dean, foundation president, healthcare executive, and a nonprofit CEO. Our first panelist is Commissioner Chancellor Gray, who serves as the Commissioner of the Office of Child Support Services at the Administration for Children and Families within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Prior to her appointment to the Biden administration in December 2021, she served as a deputy commissioner in the Georgia Department of Human Services and as the director for the Division of Child Support Services for over 26 years. Our next guest panelist accompanying us today is Joseph T. Jones, Jr., the founder and CEO of the Center for Urban Families, a Baltimore, Maryland nonprofit service organization established to empower low-income families by enhancing the ability of women and men to contribute to their families as wage earners and of men to fulfill their roles as fathers. Mr. Jones also serves on several boards, including Open Society Institute, Baltimore, and My Brother's Keeper, Baltimore, and has served as a White House advisor on fatherhood and community engagement. Lastly, we welcome Dr. Cynthia Osborne to the stage. Dr. Osborne is the founder and executive director of the National Prenatal to 3 Policy Impact Center, home of the 50-state Prenatal to 3 State Policy Roadmap and the Prenatal to 3 Policy Clearinghouse. She recently joined the faculty at Vanderbilt University's Peabody College of Education and Human Development as a professor of early childhood education and policy. Previously, she was faculty at LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin for over 16 years and served as the Associate Dean for Academic Strategies for the last 3.5 years. Thank you all so much for being here. And now, Reverend Dr. Askew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I know what a sacrifice it is to take time out of your busy life and come to a conference like this. So I've heard from so many people that it's been a successful conference, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I grew up Southern Baptist, though I'm an Episcopal clergy person right now. And as far as I can tell, everybody over there grew up in the Baptist church and thought that was the front of the room. So, let's get started. There are myriad factors that contribute to making it possible or difficult to be engaged with, for men to be engaged with their families. Today, we have brought together a group of folks who spent much of their lives working to support and empower fathers. And I'm so grateful they're willing to share some of their wisdom with us today. So let's get started. I'm going to throw this out to each of you and you can decide who wants to start, but I hope each of you will weigh in on this. Each of you has spent much of your working life in the fatherhood field, having engaged in effective practice, leading edge research, and public policy development and implementation. From your respective fields, would you please share with our audience how our approach to empowering fathers has evolved over the years and what direction you would like to see it move into? If you'd like to comment on policies that are needed at the local, state, and federal levels, please feel free to. So who'd like to kick off?
I'll get started.
All right.
So good afternoon, Tennessee. Thank you so very much for having the Federal Office of Child Support Services invited to participate in this conversation. And I do want to highlight again, I know you guys talked about it on yesterday, but we have changed our name from the Office of Child Support Enforcement to the Office of Child Support Services. So please keep that in mind. That is a commitment to us serving every member of the family.
So enforcement to service.
That is correct.
All right, all right.
I want you to write it down.
Okay.
So I want to start with this child support program. I've heard plenty of mentions about child support. I think the earlier panel did a really good job of talking about how child support is not necessarily the enemy. I want to start by responding to the question from a federal level. There is legislation in Title 40 of the Social Security Act that establishes a child support program. And with that establishment comes specific actions that each program in the 54 states and territories are required by law to take. However, I think many of you are aware that the child support program has been focused on enforcement in years past. And as a result of that previous focus, it really has negatively impacted our ability to empower fathers. So the name change in itself, as I mentioned earlier, is a commitment to serving every member of the family. And in doing so at the federal level, we are looking at opportunities to make sure that we're providing employment and training services and identifying other areas as it relates to services to meet the needs of every member of the family. I can talk all day about some of the barriers, and I know we're going to get into those questions.
Yes, we are.
But I just wanted to highlight how there is a shift in making sure that we empower those parents that are court-ordered to pay child support and identifying services that can lift them up to meet that financial and emotional need for their children.
Wow, okay. So again, Joe Jones, Center for Urban Families in Baltimore. So I'm gonna take us back a few years, right? During the early to mid 90s, there begun a set of conversations in philanthropy that led to a group of folks at various foundations to create what was called a funders collaborative to invest in fatherhood, right? And with the intention that eventually over time, it would become good public policy and we would have investments that would go beyond just philanthropic investments. And we had groups then like the National Practitioners Network for Fathers and Families, a group that I was involved with. I know Jeff Johnson has been here, was involved with that group. We also had the National Center on Fathers and Families at the University of Pennsylvania, led by Dr. Vivian Gadsden, that did a lot of research and archive work in the history of policy research and practice around fatherhood. Then we had a number of efforts in the Congress where certain bills were introduced, and none of those bills passed that led to federal investments in fatherhood. And then a seminal moment for me is the year 2000, when we had the presidential election and both presidential candidates, George Bush and Al Gore, as a part of their presidential platforms, had fatherhood centrally integrated into their presidential platforms. George Bush became president, and for the first time in the history of our country, we had a pretty significant dedicated funding stream in the federal office of the Administration for Children and Families, at that time led by Wade Horn, who I know is in the back, that was responsible for rolling out a dedicated program for healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood. That work has continued from the Bush administration to the Obama administration to the Trump administration, and now has been grandfathered over to the Biden administration, and hopefully that will continue in this current administration and beyond. But then I also think about where the field has to be. And I think where the field has to be and where it needs to head. An example of that is why we're here together under the leadership of Commissioner Carter, and that is with states. States, this work can't exist solely in philanthropy. It can't exist solely in the federal government. It has to exist in states. And so we need more states to step up to the plate and begin to invest in these creative and innovative ways. But we also have to undergird the human services or nonprofit sector. We've got to make sure that on the ground, the human services sector has the requisite level of investment to allow it to take on this work of serving some of our nation's most marginalized dads, right? We're not talking about, we want to make sure that we have information awareness that's available to all dads across all income levels, but the real work has to happen on the ground with low income marginalized dads, independent of their skin color, right? But I will speak as a Black man, how difficult it is to try to be a father coming out of certain circumstances without any help. And the human services sector is the place where that has to be.
Thank you.
Well, I won't add much to this because I know we also have lots of other things to talk about, but as the researcher on the panel, I want to tell you that what's really changed over the last several decades is that the research is actually started to focus on fathers. And I know that doesn't sound like a big change, but I will tell you that every theory that we've ever had about how parents influence their children has come through how moms influence their children. And the only time that dads were ever included in studies was to think that someone is providing income into a household. And that was how dads were modeled in all of our psychology studies and everything that we did to really think about dads. And it's around the same time that you're talking about, around 2000, that we actually started to change the way that we were thinking about dads. And we actually started to ask them questions about how they engage with their kids. We had never talked directly to fathers in research. We just went right to the moms. They had the kids. We don't know where the dads were. Turned out they actually come to the birth of their children. Turns out a lot of them are actually living with their children, even though they're not married. We didn't really focus on that before. And over the last 20 years or so, we've really done a lot more to study the independent effect that fathers actually have on their children. And I'll just confirm what all of you know, but dads actually matter. They matter a lot. They matter in different ways than moms matter. And we're doing better at being able to study them, but boy, do we have a long way to go. So just from a research perspective, we are still behind, and it's good to know that we're catching up in meaningful ways in our public policy and practices.
Thank you all for weighing in on that question. Mr. Jones, I'm going to go to you next. What are some of the most effective practices that you've seen or perhaps even put into place yourself to actively engage fathers in the child support process? As you answer it, it would be helpful if you could speak to how practitioners and child support enforcement partners in our audience can help empower fathers and the policy barriers that keep fathers from being able to meet their child support obligations.
Okay, I need to make this a little personal, if it's okay, right, to provide context. So my mom and dad split when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I was a Boy Scout, and I was an altar boy at church. And I was the only child. And when my father left without any explanation, he just was gone. My life spiraled out of control. And at 13, I began to inject heroin. And over 17 years, I was in and out of incarceration because I was addicted to the drug of my choice. I also had a son out of wedlock during that period. When I was fortunate enough to work my way out of that, and began to think about what a future would look like absent that old life, I had 2 folks that I owed. And I'm glad there wasn't the third one, meaning the mafia, right? But the 2, one was child support and the other was the IRS, right? And you don't want to be indebted to either one of those, right? So I don't necessarily come from a history where I embrace child support at all, right?
We're gonna work on you.
But I realized when I became engaged in fatherhood as a practice, I had to have a partnership with child support because of the population I would serve. I was working with low-income dads, and I'm going to give you a snapshot of Baltimore. So I'm in Baltimore, and I'm in West Baltimore. The geographic marker would be the area where Freddie Gray lived and died while in police custody, right? And the 5 contiguous zip codes where my organization is located, right? These 5 zip codes, they're a total of 8,000 individuals who owe over $120 million in aggregate child support, state child support, right? So literally, if I am going to help these guys get into the labor market, which is clearly something you want to do when you're working with somebody who isn't a parent, independent, whether they're custodial or non-custodial, right? and they have that kind of debt, I've got to have child support as a partner. So I had to get over my thoughts around child support because of my own personal, circumstances back in the day. And so we fortunately, at around 2014, we had a child support director that was very progressive thinking. And I was able to go to his office and sit down with him. And then I was able to convince him, you need to come and sit in on our fatherhood sessions. We need you in that space. And he came and he took us up on that. And he said, well, look, what else can we do? And we said, well, we know that thinking about state-owned child support is an important conversation we got to have. And there has to be a way we got to think creatively and innovatively about reducing some of that debt, particularly since the federal Office of Child Support said to state child support offices, you can forgive this state-owed debt under certain circumstances and conditions. And so ultimately what we did, we brought together a group of guys, fathers in our fatherhood program from West Baltimore with the child support team, and we co-designed a fatherhood initiative that allowed the fathers to participate in certain programs within our organization. And for each one of those programs they participated in and completed, they got percentage of their state-owed child support wiped away. And the child support office also had another complimentary debt arrears forgiveness program that if they completed that over a 2-year period, if they owed $10,000, again, in state owed, not money to the family, but to the state, they could get that entire $10,000 wiped away. And that was because we respected the voices and the ingenuity of these guys, these dads who cared deeply about their children. They wanted to get into the labor market, but with their debt held over their head, there was no way that they could easily navigate the world of work. And particularly in a state like Maryland, where the state child support office could take up to 65% of their W-2 income, even if we help them to get a job. So for us, it was a business equation to help us to get to that. And I think that's one of the ideas and ways in which we can think about how fatherhood practitioners and child support could work together in partnership for the community.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to get to come back to some more strategies in just a minute. Thank you for that answer. Commissioner Gray, from your perspective, can you speak to the relationship between economic mobility and fatherhood? And I will let everybody know that I'm going to give you all a chance to weigh in on the following. When considering fatherhood and employment, how do you talk about work-family integration? Are there key skills that translate across workforce development, parenting, and relationship building? And are there essential elements we need to keep in mind when developing effective employer engagement strategies to support economically aspiring fathers? So let's go back and I'll remind you how I started that. Can you speak to the relationship between economic mobility and fatherhood?
So I know I don't have to, I know I don't have to tell you that there's a strong relationship between economic mobility and fatherhood. But as we expound on the response to the question, how many of you in here have had a direct experience with the child support program? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. All right, so of you that raised your hands, how many of you have had a negative experience with the child support program? Okay, well, he stood up. Okay. I saw you.
Eyes up.
All right. And so we want to transition. How many of you in here have had a positive experience with this? Ooh, thank you. We got 2, 3. Yes. Okay, we got some over here as well. Yes. Well, the reason why I wanted you to raise your hands is because it really and truly speaks to the question. Unfortunately, let's be honest, the name in itself, child support enforcement, really and truly, hey Seth, clearly communicates the focus of the program in years past. And what we have found, because economic mobility is key to fatherhood, key to parents that are coordinated to pay child support, there has been a shift in the child support program in the last few years, as mentioned here, because there are parents that are coordinated to pay child support that want to provide emotional and financial support to their children, and they do not have the economic means to do so. The process and the practices, as you mentioned earlier, is focused on specific tasks, whether that's intake or establishment or enforcement or review and modification. That is what the law requires. There has been progress, though, like here with Commissioner Carter in Tennessee and in other states, focused on finding not only funding, but finding opportunities to establish relationships, to leverage some funding that currently exists within the child support program, and making sure that in addition to those items that are required by law, that there are services provided to parents court to pay child support. But let's be clear on the people who raised their hands. If child support just came out and said, hey, we want to help you provide opportunities for employment or provide opportunities for training, how many of you that raised your hand would trust that invitation? Not one. Oh, got one.
Oh,
And that speaks volume. There are people that don't trust the government for whatever reason, valid or not valid. There are those that don't trust the system, like was addressed in the earlier panel. And then there's those negative experiences based on either focus or based on just our practices during that time. I just wanted to lift up that there's a strong connection between the economic mobility and fatherhood, and we are working very hard to transition into providing services to every member of the family, especially parents court-ordered to pay child support.
and we had one man raise his hand out there that he trusted.
Yes.
So there is hope.
Yes, I promise
There
I
is
didn't.
hope.
I told him, I don't know who he was. I didn't promise to pay him.
All right, would any of you like to weigh in on the three sub-questions that we have? When considering fatherhood and employment, how do you talk about work-family integration? Are there key skills that translate across workforce development, parenting, and relationship building? And are there essential elements we need to keep in mind when developing effective employer engagement strategies to support economically aspiring fathers? Pick your favorite, pick your pill.
I have something I want to say that's a little bit off of that. So if you want to speak more directly.
Well, let me speak to employee engagement. So we can't work with a population of folks who are under the radar, underground, haven't had great experiences with doing anything that involves engaging systems. And we have a workforce strategy that doesn't include working with employers. But employers, the worst thing I think that I could ever do is to go to an employer partner or prospective employer partner and say, please give this guy a try, right? No, employers are about meeting bottom lines and business objectives. So I am trying to prepare a young man to present himself in a way that makes him attractive as an employer. But I also want him to be empowered enough to know that there's a way in which you can engage an employer independent of your circumstances to articulate your skills, right? But you also can ask certain questions about, what are the benefits? What are the professional development opportunities? The other thing that I like doing with employers is having an employer to take me to the roof of his or her company, and let's look in together and let's map out both visually and in writing what a trajectory in your company or business looks like. So when I'm helping that young person to come in the front door, that young person is coming in the front door armed with information that says, I may have to start at the bottom, but here are ways in which I can move up and beyond if I know what that trajectory would look like. And on the back end, if we are armed with the information, we can provide coaching to him along the way to help him stay on track with his career goals within that particular company. And if it doesn't happen to pan out long-term, that it's a legitimate relationship with that employer partner, let's help him to create an exit strategy that's based on his ability to find another job before he lets go of the one that he currently has. There's nothing like getting frustrated and quit a job and find yourself with your back up against the wall with no income. That is not what we want to do. So an effective employer strategy is all of what I said, but most important is to help a person to understand If you think that this particular job is not for you long-term, let's think about what the next opportunity is before you let go of it.
Yeah, and I want to add to that really quick. I really appreciated how he lifted up the employer perspective. How many people in here have dealt with a fatherhood program or a parental accountability program through child support? Yes. So that is just what I would like to add to those comments. There are so many enforcement or administrative actions that the child support program can take based on the legal requirement. But when the child support program in the state or county moves forward with implementing a fatherhood program, or like in Georgia, a parental accountability court program, all of these negative administrative or legal actions that can be taken by the child support program, the goal is to try to remove some of those barriers as well. And so if we're able to get parents who are courted to pay child support to participate in a fatherhood program or to participate in a parental accountability court program, that child support program has the authority to delay enforcement actions, driver's license suspension, referrals to court for contempt, pulling incarceration orders. It provides opportunities to support employment and training, and it provides opportunities to delay specific actions. It does not vacate the order by the judge. And then it also gives an opportunity to establish a relationship with the judge, not between just child support and the judge, but a relationship between the parent and the judge. And the judge carries a lot of weight. And so these additional relationships that may or may not be established directly through the child support program can be established with relationships and partnerships based on what he was speaking to, and relationships and accountability case management strategies that are established by the judge in that county and or state.
Very good.
Well, I just want to bring it outside a little bit of child support and employment. In that, just because a father has a job and is actually paying his child support doesn't mean that he's necessarily economically stable. And we obviously want both of those things to happen, but I'm always reminded about a story of a father I was talking with in Texas, and he had a full-time job and it paid a pretty good wage. And he paid his child support for his 2 children that he had. So he paid 25% of his net income. Well, he also had a parenting time order that allowed him to visit his kids, which is what it was called, but allowed him to parent directly with his children the first, third, and fifth weekend of every month, and a Wednesday every week, and some time in the summer and some time over holidays and some extended weekends. And if you added all those days up, he had his children just about 40% of the time. But it was his money, right, his earnings that were going to the custodial parent. And the custodial parent had remarried, and she was married to someone who had quite a bit of income, and they were living in a, kind of middle-class lifestyle. But his income, especially after child support, only afforded him a very small 1-bedroom apartment. And he couldn't have roommates based on some of the parenting time arrangements. And although his, finances, if he were the custodial parent, he would have been eligible for additional supports like food stamps, maybe even health care, but he's not eligible for tax credits or other things that are afforded to the custodial parent. And so he struggled every time his kids came to visit. He couldn't take them out to dinner. He didn't have Game Boys or Xboxes. And it really bothered him so much that he was embarrassed by the way that he had to, his kind of inability to provide those things for his kid that he wanted. We need child support. We certainly need employment, but the things that you're saying about ability to kind of climb up and move up is really important. And to think about our non-custodial parents, when they're doing what we want, they're actively engaged in their kids' lives. And we may need to think of additional ways to support them and think about them as a full parent rather than just someone who children go to visit, who need to send money on the other time. So a shift in framework that really helped me to think about things very differently.
I'm struck by the fact that all three of you mentioned relationship in some way, whether it's relationships with the employers, relationship with the court system, the judges, relationship with the children, and the things that get in the way of that. And without the relationship, none of the rest of it works. So we have to be thinking always about how can we make it possible for rich and full relationships to be developed and throughout the process. So, Dr. Osborne, I'm going to ask you to address this question. What does current research on father involvement tell us about the role fathers play in the social and emotional development of their children? And what programs can be implemented to support this role? What are some of the most promising research findings and practices for strengthening the relationship between fathers and the mothers of their children?
Well, the podcast really talked about what happens when dads are not with their kids. But there's so much that we're learning about what it means for children when their parents are engaged, that it really does build a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of self-confidence. When children have an engaged father, they're much less likely to engage in riskier behaviors. They're more likely to complete schooling. There's a host of outcomes, positive outcomes that are associated with father engagement. But where the research has really helped guide us is to understand what it is that promotes father engagement. And I like to think of it as a table, with 4 legs and each of these kind of 4 pillars. And that as you're working with fathers, to think about whether he's short on one of these legs, because the research is pretty clear that you need all 4 in order to really promote healthy engagement between the father and children. So the first and actually the most important and the biggest predictor of whether he's going to be engaged with his children is his relationship with the children's other parent, with the mom. And it doesn't mean that he has to be married to the mom. It doesn't have to be living with the mom. It's about having a healthy co-parenting relationship and understanding where their boundaries are and how they can be respectful of one another. And that makes a huge difference. And the programs, there are a lot of programs out there, and I bet some of you are offering these programs that try to help with fathers thinking about the mother of their child as a co-parent, and to see how to do that in a healthy way and how it can be very damaging to the child when they don't have a healthy relationship. The second is financial stability. And again, it's not that fathers have to be rich to be a good dad. It's that they have to feel like they can provide for their kids, that they're working hard, and that they see that that makes a difference in their kid's life. It's why the studies are pretty clear that when the money comes through the formal child support system, it actually doesn't have as much of an impact on the kid as when he gives the money to the mom, to the kid directly. So not that the formal child support system isn't necessary, but that's the second leg. The third is that he has to grow up. That's kind of a nice way of saying that he needs to stop doing things Kathy Eden used to say, ripping and running the streets, but that when he's engaged in behaviors that he's not proud of himself, he's less likely to want to engage with his kids. He's not comfortable hanging out maybe with folks who are doing things that are illegal, and then going and bringing his kid close to that. So the more that he feels comfortable in his own behaviors and the fewer risky behaviors that he's involved with, the more likely he is to engage. And then finally, he just has to understand what it is to be a dad. That fourth leg of the stool is that confidence that he's got the skills and the knowledge, and he's the best person in the whole world to be able to provide that to his child in a unique way. So those 4 things, the relationship with the mom, his financial stability, his kind of confidence in himself as a parent, and his kind of shedding any risky behaviors, those things add up, and a stable table is really what we're looking for to promote father engagement.
I love that idea of the more one thinks of themselves as a worthwhile human being, the more likely they are to be able to communicate that to their children.
Yeah.
And that's a critical piece of research, I think, for all of us. So we have time for questions from the audience. I hope that some of these answers have stimulated questions for you. And we have some people out with Leah. You've got a mic here. We have a question in the center here.
Not wearing my running shoes.
How you doing? I'm Dr. P from Man to Man Urban Youth Advocate. And I wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Osborne said about the child support time. He spoke about the father that was spending 40% of the time with his children. And here's the thing that I dealt with actually, which made me even go into the father work, is that I had my children 4 days a week, but they didn't spend the night with me.
Oh.
So the mother got the overnight business while they were at school, but all the actual time they were with me. And it put me in a bind where when I walked, with the, talk with the child support, and I stayed current with them and had, a relationship with them in terms of what was going on. But it put me in a debt of $50,000 overnight. And 2 years later, after fighting for custody, I get custody of my children, but I still have the debt. And that's a debt that Joe Jones was talking about, not owed to the state, owed to the mother, which you'll never be able to get away with that unless the mother agrees to drop the debt. Now, how do you think that fits in with these fathers that actually want to have time with their children, but set an expectation that they could never make, put them in a very awkward situation, but you say the children is in the best interest?
So was that question for me? I heard you say
That's
that.
child support.
I
That's
figured it was
child
for me.
support. I just
figured it
use
was
her
for
as
me.
the example.
Okay, so I agree. And let me just start off by saying I apologize you had to go through that situation. I'm not making excuses. I actually have this down as a note talking about access and visitation. I can explain to you how those type of situations happen. It is an opportunity for the health and human industry to address. Access and visitation, unfortunately, is outside of our legal authority. It definitely belongs to the attorneys to determine access and visitation. The term access and visitation is more associated with child support, is really custody of the children. When the child support order is established, no matter what state you're in or what county you're in, that authority really belongs to the judge that has established the order. The good news is we have some states out there that are pretty progressive. Their state laws allows for parenting time to be included in the child support order. I don't know if we have people here from Michigan, but I also have been told, yes, I've been told that that parenting language holds both parties accountable. Unfortunately, that language, all states don't have that language. And until other states get that language, I would strongly recommend that there's more education to parents about review and modification. You specifically stated how you had your children 4 days, and even though they didn't spend the night, it just sounded like a review and modification of your child support order should have been warranted or sought with the courts. Based on that shared income model, if that's what your state adopted in the program. And then there were other opportunities as well, not to fix the problem, because you've already addressed it. When orders are established by judges, we do not have the authority to negotiate arrears owed to the family. There is plenty of opportunities by judges to negotiate arrears owed to the state. And so I just want to lift up their formal responses. One, really and truly pursuing opportunities for parenting time to be included in child support orders, even though we don't have the authority at the federal level to mandate it. It's at the state level. And then two, making sure that we are educating our parents, especially fathers, around your opportunity to pursue review and modifications to your order based on circumstances and situations that you just mentioned.
And others, please feel free to add.
I think there was a question here.
Yeah, sir? If any of you have
Oh,
other
no.
comments,
Fine.
okay.
No.
Oh,
Go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
I don't have actually anything more to add than what Commissioner Gray said.
Well, the question's for you. The one I
Okay.
have, question's for you. You mentioned, I thought I heard you mention that the support order or the monies that are given to the family have more impact when it comes directly from the father as opposed to the child support agency. I don't know if you have a chance to kind of elaborate what that impact might be, or if this maybe a conversation for a later date, but can you explain a little bit more in depth, like what that impact is socially, economically?
Yeah, so in the research, we call it formal support and informal support, which is really was the dad, I'm just using the dad for a non-custodial parent. There are certainly non-custodial mothers as well. But the dad is ordered to pay and he pays child support formally through the system, or another mechanism, which he may or may not have an order, but he contributes. He doesn't live with the child, but he contributes in either in kind, so buying clothes or other sort diapers, other sorts of goods, or direct cash. And both matter. But when you ask moms about the money, when you ask about what it means for their relationship, the children in the studies that I'm talking about are too young to have a say as to what they think about it, that they see the informal payments as something that is, that he didn't have to do it. It's valued higher. It's associated with kind of more likely to be stronger relationships between the two, positive co-parenting relationships, and the impact on kind of the frequency by which he continues to pay and so forth seems to be greater when it's through these informal channels. So.
Other questions? Sir?
Yeah, Gary Wilson with DHS. This is for Dr. Osborne. There's been a lot of research around what happens to families when some of the human services supports are taken away when incomes go up, and it's called the benefits cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been studies on situations in which fathers' incomes are affected for could be up to 19 years, and in some cases with college as part of that process, 20 plus years on the fatherhood cliff? Any such studies?
So I don't think that they have done a study exactly what you're suggesting, but there are some studies that they've tried to look at the difference between what a father is providing for their child if they are the father who is living with that child and raising that child within the same household, and whether a father is contributing kind of independent from that household. And now there has been a study to show that when the non-custodial parent, right, the father, is also a custodial parent, that does have an impact on the resources that they have to provide for custodial children, the children who live in their household, because there is 20%-ish of their income that's leaving the household. But when you think about the resources that are actually going to the child indirectly, you know, is it better to just pay for your kids or to raise your kids? It's better off to just pay for them. And if his money is all that matters to you, right? 20% of your income, you're spending more of that if you're living with your kid and the kids in the household. So I don't, the actual kind of benefits cliff and what it looks like for the dads who have a child or not, the research on that is a lot less clear because the dads who have children who live in other households also tend to have other characteristics that are associated with lower earnings. And on average is what I'm suggesting. And so the research is not as clear as to what it does to his kind of lifetime success, if you will.
Thank you. Other questions? Here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question, I was sitting here listening to your panel. I'm trying to phrase the question. I got a phone call from a friend of mine, and I told him I was at this conference, and I told him about what this panel is going to be about. And he wanted me to ask about child support for a child he did not know that he had. I believe he called it the Jack in the Box scenario, where all of a sudden it sprung on him that he has a child and now he owes child support. Commissioner, is it true that if you have a child that you did not know you had, that you are obligated to pay child support for all the years that it's, let's say the child's 16 years of child support. And then if the child is an adult, can that adult child or the 18-year-old child sue the father for back child support? Thank you.
So thank you so much for the question. I'm not familiar with the Jack in the Box term, but I'm definitely familiar with these two case scenarios. So let's start off, and I don't want to just go all into too many details, but what I do want to do is acknowledge how both of these case scenarios could have happened. Number one, there are situations where a child is born and the mother may not have shared it with the bio father. And what happens is two ways child support order is established in that situation. We either get a referral from the DFACS organization because the mother is receiving public assistance, and most oftentimes once the referral is sent over, it's required. And when she's receiving public assistance, a father has to be named. And so we're required by law to pursue a child support case based on that referral. What happens in that situation is a father is named. Our responsibility is to reach out and try to get that father into the office based on the information that's provided. So I just want to use a very generic, sounds funny, but could very well possibly happen. I have had this child with Denzel Washington, the actor. Let's be clear. And we have this
And you would have
child.
made that known.
Yes, more than once for those of you that have heard me speak. So I'm trying to speak something into existence. I have had this child with Denzel. I have a son with him. I have never notified him. I fell on hard times. I pursued public assistance, and I am responsible for naming a person. I named Denzel Washington. There could be 1,000 Denzel, well, not really 1,000, but there could be a few Denzel Washingtons. We are responsible through the court systems to reach out to Denzel based on the information that's available. We cannot put Denzel under a child support order without the judge's consent and approval. And if a judge has determined that based on the information we have found, based on the level of service, it could be personal service or notorious service, that this is Denzel and he's avoiding service, that's how that order is established, and Denzel never knows it. And arrearages are accumulated. Now, I am not putting the blame here. I'm just explaining how a situation that could happen based on the rules of the court and based on the information that's been provided to the child support agency. Now, the second scenario around any type of enforcement actions that's been taken and a child is 16 years old, let's just assume that Denzel didn't know, me and Denzel had a very good time. I may have communicated to Denzel that I had a child and Denzel was non-responsive. There's an opportunity, not in all states, but there's an opportunity to make 100% sure that paternity testing is done or a default order is established. And Denzel is responsible for responding to the child support program as it relates to these arrearages. If there's no response, he is going to be held accountable. And unfortunately, without communication, there are actions that are taken by the program. It is in the best interest of the person that's named to either respond, and it is also the responsibility of the person who has had the child to notify the person. And if you are notified, respond. And if you're not notified, request testing if at all possible. So you're not placed under a legal obligation for a child that may not necessarily be biologically your child.
All right, we have time for one short question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Janique Pearlie at Man, and my question is about the IRS and child support and the relationship there.
Okay.
If a parent, non-custodial, does not have the authority or the ability in the court order to file or use the children on the taxes, but they do. And then they use that money that they get back, that gets taken by child support to pay their arrears. Where's the jurisdiction there on how to correct that kind of situation?
So I want to make sure that I'm clear on your question. When you say, are we talking about the non-custodial parent, the custodial parent? Because I could tell you how this process works.
The non-custodial parent does not have the tax credits, but the non-custodial parent took that privilege and filed taxes, got a big return,
Oh,
and then that return was placed against the arrears. So basically paying someone with their own money.
okay.
So
So,
where's that jurisdiction and who can correct that?
okay, so you would definitely need to reach out to the child support program in that state and or county. Make sure that you're providing them with the supporting documentation. How the child support program works is once a person meets a certain arrears balance, the case is certified and referred to the Internal Revenue Service. And the purpose of that process is to make sure that if a parent is behind, not cooperating with the child support program, then the refund is provided to the custodial parent, not the new wife, not the new girlfriend. That credit is provided to him toward the arrearages, and then the custodial parent receives the family. In this situation that you've explained, that definitely needs to be worked through the child support program, so he doesn't receive credit for arrearages that he didn't pay, and that the Internal Revenue Service is aware that this referral was not honored. So it is a joint effort, but the child support program will be the first place you would want to pursue making a correction in that area.
Okay, now, one last round. In 30 seconds, I want each of you to tell us what these folks from all the states represented need to know about fatherhood. What's the one biggest takeaway they need to know about creating effective fathers?
Well, let me start by saying that fathers matter. I've never met a father who said, I don't care about my children, but I have met fathers who needed a lot of support to actually have their vision for what they want to do as a good father come to life. And if you are in the state of Tennessee, you got a window that's open because Commissioner Carter has created conditions for you all to have a level of investment in fatherhood that most states would die for, right? So that would be my 30 seconds.
Great.
Well, I was going to say basically the exact same thing. Dads want to be engaged with their kids. It is just so important to them. And when they're not, it's a sign that they're hurting. And the ability to help them is something that is just so powerful. And I'm grateful for the work that you are doing because they really do want to be involved in their children's lives.
Mine is similar to, I just want to say that engagement is really what I want to communicate and would like for you to leave with. There is a level of engagement that's required at every level: county, state, tribal, federal, nonprofit organizations. That level of engagement is key to making the change that has to take place in order to better support and empower fathers.
Very good. I'm going to close with one quick story. I grew up, I had 6 adverse childhood experiences. We didn't know what those were called back when I was a young fellow, but I had a lot of support coming up in my life. Well, I was active in Boy Scouts and was an Eagle Scout. And so when the time came for my church to raise money for our scout troop, they asked me if I would give the talk, make the big ask at church one day. So This is before I was ordained and I got all my little speech together about how beneficial Boy Scouts were and all that. And I got up and I stood before our church, and our church has a long aisle down the center. And as I stood there about to start my little pitch, I had a vision. Now, I'd read about visions in the Bible. I might even have had a vision or two in college, but that was probably from another reason. But in any case, I'm standing there looking down this long aisle, and what I saw was a bowling alley. And I just stood there for a minute trying to figure out what this could possibly be about. And then it came to me, and I put my cards in my pocket and I said, how many of you have been bowling? And almost everybody raised their hand. I said, how many of you have been kiddie bowling? And most of the people raised their hand. I said, what's the difference between kiddie bowling and adult bowling? The bumpers, exactly. See, we're all bowling balls. Our moms pop us out right down the lane of life, but there's not a single one of us who gets popped out straight down the lane. Everybody veers to the left or everybody veers to the right. And the only difference between the kids who make it all the way to the pins and the ones who end up in the gutters are the bumpers. Daddies can be bumpers. Daddies should be given the opportunity to be bumpers. Daddies, fathers should be supported as they try to become bumpers. Without bumpers, none of us make it. And there's not a one of us in this room who would be here today without bumpers. So let's make daddies bumpers.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
For our panel here, thank you, Reverend Dr. Jerry Askew, Commissioner Tangela Gray, Joseph T. Jones Jr., and Dr. Cynthia Osborne.